Hi, nice to see all of you. Who here has seen Madame Butterfly before? I think that's every hand. Who has seen it more than once? Okay, oh, that's a lot of hands. Who is looking forward to seeing it again? Trick question. Yeah, okay. So that just highlights something, right? That this is a piece we come back to again and again. And one of the things I want to get to tonight is the why behind that. You know, what is it about this piece that still fascinates us, 121 years later? And I think there's something, there are several pieces like this in the opera repertoire that continue to be fresh somehow. For me, another one is The Marriage of Figaro, right? That 250 years later, we see that the human condition has not changed. And that we struggle with the same things, and the challenges of humanity are the same. And so we're going to talk about that tonight in regards to Madame Butterfly, and also just a little bit about Puccini in general. I just wanted to give a little framework here. I have a very interesting history with this opera because the first time I saw it, I was conducting it. And it's a very interesting story of how that happened. I was a young conductor. I was a couple years out of grad school and starting to make my way. And I was at a regional company assisting a conductor on a production. And we were in the final period of the production. And he came to me one afternoon and he said, well, guess what? We were in Omaha. And he said, the University of Nebraska at Lincoln is doing a production of Madame Butterfly. And they brought in, a couple of professionals and then, paired them with the student cast, and they've lost their conductor. And I can't do it, so I think you should do it. And I said, well, how? I said, I'm scheduled to conduct this opera, but not for another year, and I haven't started learning it yet. And he said, oh, I think you'll be fine. And I said, well, when does it start? And he said, well, their first dress rehearsal's tomorrow night. And so I said, I just don't think I can do that. And he said, well, here's the score, you'll be fine. And so I stayed up all night, and to learn something that fast, you just sort of have to, a recording is very helpful, right? Because you just need to ingrain it as quickly as possible. I stayed up all night, and then the next evening I was conducting it in an orchestra pit. So it was a wild ride, and you know what? I don't remember any of it. It's sort of one of those moments when you have to get so deep into something you can't even think about it, or you'll get scared. So fortunately, since then, I've had the opportunity to do the piece several times and fallen in love with it more and more. Butterfly, Puccini, in general, is in the period that we call the Verismo period. So this is in late 19th century Europe, where the focus of opera is shifting to realism, right? So that Verismo actually, meaning, the truth, this is how we actually feel. So moving away from opera being focused on maybe gods or mythical figures or rulers or things like this, to actual lived experience of people. Right? We see that Bohème is a great example. We see real people dealing with real problems. And that's something that in operatic history wasn't necessarily the focus, but really in the Verismo period, that becomes the primary focus. And so this is a really, I mean this in the best way, of an attempt to manipulate your emotions. And Puccini, as we will talk about, more this evening, really was a master of that, right? Which I think is one of the reasons it's so enduring, because we can relate to it. We can all find something of ourselves in some of these characters in these operas. Sometimes things we don't love, right? So I'm very fortunate tonight to have two great guests, and I firmly believe that in conducting and leadership, sometimes the best thing to do is to stay out of the way. And I've got two really wonderful guests tonight who are I'm just gonna kind of let them go, because even over our email exchange planning, I was just really thrilled with what they were bringing to talk about, and the insights that I know you'll enjoy hearing. So a lot of you know Dr. Charles Carson. He's an associate professor at UT. He teaches contemporary art music, popular music, hip hop, jazz, you name it. His research interests include music and tourism, the political histories of American musics, and African American expressive cultures. He currently serves as the Erstbaumer Scholar in Residence for Austin Opera and has presented and published internationally on a wide variety of topics ranging from Scandinavian folk jazz to Disney theme park music. A new friend for me, who I'm delighted to have here tonight, is Yoko Stetson. She is an opera lecturer and cultural event producer with a career spanning the UK, Japan, and the US. After studying art and opera history in London, she launched an introduction to the opera and later worked with US opera companies on outreach and audience development. In New York, she founded the Big Idea Opera Project, a touring children's opera initiative, while consulting for major Japanese firms on Broadway-related investments. Now based in Austin, she continues to expand her opera education work and serves as vice president of the Austin, Japan community, leading cross-cultural initiatives and collaborations. So please welcome Yoko Stetson and Dr. Charles Carson. I was joking when we were back in the green room because we just kind of, the conversation just set fire while we were back there. And I said, we're gonna have to be careful that we don't talk about it all backstage and leave something for out there. Thank you for being here, for both of you. And I know you're both gonna bring some fascinating perspectives to this. And we're gonna go broad here, right? We're gonna talk about a lot of things, Puccini, but then exoticism, where these operas are set, why cultural and historical context for these things. But I would love to start with just the source material, because this is a really important thing that will set the stage for a lot of things we talk about later in the evening, is understanding where this came from, right? So I wonder, Yoko, if you wouldn't mind starting with that, and you can grab that microphone right there.
Okay. Okay, thank you. Okay. So what was the question? I'm sorry.
I just want to sort of launch us into the source material. So like the Belasco, et cetera,
Right,
sort of
yes.
how Puccini came to know this, where was it from, et
Okay,
cetera.
yes. So the Madame Butterfly is actually originally a little short play or book by the American the writer John Lang, and he never been to Japan, but his sister was in Nagasaki, and he heard from his sister a little story about this Japanese girl and foreign officer that fell in love, but he left. And that kind of sad story that inspired from that, his sister's, all this information that he wrote Butterfly. And then David Belasco, that Broadway, the producer and the director, he made that into the theater on Broadway. Then actually it was hit in New York, I guess. Then it was performed in London. That where Puccini actually was there to promote one of his opera, I think maybe Tosca. Then he saw a play, and that was obviously done by English, and he didn't understand anything, Puccini didn't, but he was so into it, and as soon as he finished, and he went to see Belasco and asked, can I make that into the opera? And he's saying blah, blah, blah in Italian and English, all mixed. Then he got the right to tie into the opera. He just fell in love with that. But there obviously from what John Lang wrote and Belasco made into play is pretty different. He made it to more drama with this suicide scene. The original John Lang's the book, the story didn't have that part. Butterfly didn't die, but she did with Belasco.
And that's not uncommon, right? For opera composers to adapt something. I mean,
yes.
Verdi did the same thing with Traviata.
Mm-hmm.
The Traviata is very different than the Woman of the Camellias, the play that it's based on. And what I find really interesting about this, the genesis of this, is that it's a Western story. right?
Yes.
By a Western author, and we have reference already New York and London, where an Italian composer saw it and became aware of what would become this opera. So I think that's some really good context for us to carry forward into this conversation. Charles, I wonder if you could now take us into the piece is completed, the premiere is coming up in 1904 at a very notable theater, and what happens?
So the piece was set to premiere. It premiered. In fact, it did happen. Spoiler alert! At La Scala in Milan. So this is the hall of record for Italy and for some people all of Europe. But we're not going to start that fight tonight. Okay, we'll talk about it later. And going into this, I mean, so Puccini is famous by this point. I mean, he had an early sort of thing with the stuff like Edgar or whatever, but then, of course, you have Manon Lescaut, which is, he's very young and it becomes a hit. We're coming off of things like La Bohème. Ever heard of it? So La Bohème comes out of this. This is heavily anticipated, right? But one of the issues that happens at this time is the publishers had a lot of power back then, right? So Ricordi, his publisher, I mean, they sort of control everything. So they're finding librettists, they're finding halls, they're finding conductors, they're finding sopranos. They have this kind of power. And a lot of the other composers in Italy, and there were sort of two big publishing houses, and Ricordi was the bigger of the two. So the rest of them either weren't Ricordi artists, or they were Ricordi artists, and seeing all the best libretto, all the best librettists, all these resources coming from Ricordi to this one young composer, and they started to be very jealous about this, right? And so, like most musicians, they were completely, they absorbed their emotions and handled them very evenly, and they didn't overreact. But in our universe, what they did was, at the premiere, it was, again, we love to use the word fiasco for premieres. But in this case, it really was. A lot of detractors showed up and they sort of harassed and harangued the whole time. So by the end of the performance, you have sort of a divided house where half the people are hissing and booing and the others are like, this is a masterpiece for all ages. Tell you who wins after we watch it. But, the interesting thing is, even, in the middle of this, and this is La Scala, where even today they will tell you in the middle of the note you're holding how well you're doing, right? So this was a very sort of powerful moment, and it's actually the sort of last little part of this is he was always very protective of his family. He's like, okay, don't come to the premiere. It's always crazy anyway. Come to a later performance. But he was so proud of this one. From the founding of the story and all these things, he's like, this really has it. And so he invited his sisters and his family to be in the box for this premiere, and it was like the worst premiere he had had at that point. It recovers, right? It recovers very quickly, and people recognized the power of the work.
But he actually did something that's not, ordinary, but has happened sometimes in history, is that he withdrew the piece after that. So they canceled the rest of it, and he said, I need to go work on this. And so
even the best artist has self-doubt, right? So,
yeah.
So despite all the stuff we know about the detractors and all the politics behind the scenes, he still says, well, there is something with this. He withdraws the work, goes home, reworks it, and a month later, at another town in Lombardy, in Brescia, he premieres another version that people love even more, right? And so it's this thing that keeps sort of getting tightened up, I think, on record. What are there, 5 versions, right?
That's right.
Some version of this, but this is about a work that he cared a lot about, and he really, really put a lot of personal. I know it seems odd for us today, but this is a world in which composers are writing an opera or two a season for most of the time, right? So they're just churning out operas the way Michael Bay churns out movies, right? And so this kind of a thing, for him to sort of get so precious about this so quickly and react so strongly to the premiere, tells you how much he loved the work.
Yeah, and that's amazing. I thank you for that context, and I wonder if we could stick with you, Charles, for a minute. And just give us, because we're going to hear some music shortly, and I wonder if you could just give a little sort of musical context for the way that Puccini's writing. We talked before you came out about the way he used music to very much to manipulate the emotions of the listener and the audience member. But what are specific techniques that he was using to do that?
Yeah, well, from a compositional, and this won't be on the test, but from a compositional point of view, one of the things about Puccini that I think is powerful is he uses relatively little resources to do a lot. He doesn't have a lot of extra stuff. This is not Wagner with like 30 French horns on stage and stuff, or 30 more off stage. But instead, he's using what we call diatonic harmony, so it's the notes of the scale. There's not like a lot of extra crazy things thrown in there. He may combine them in fun ways, like add a sixth here or a ninth here, but for the most part, it's pretty. What we might think of as kind of white note harmony, right? But a lot of this is the clarity of that enables him to do a lot with emotion, with drama, in terms of these sort of harmonic pushes. So we'll add a little extra, like a chord that shifts up and back down when you didn't expect it. He's using the same ingredients you have in the kitchen at home, but he's making haute cuisine, right? And this is the sort of the master of this. So, for example, again, we talked about this backstage. He's not doing anything kind of groundbreaking, like you even said yourself, like the stuff he's doing with the orchestra in Bohème is actually kind of more interesting, combining weird combinations. But here, he will have a beautiful melody line, and he will have the strings sort of lushly follow that up and down, and let's say the soprano, I don't want to spoil what's about to happen, will weave in and out of that, singing in along with the strings, and then sort of fall out of that and then jump back in, so it feels very organic. And that's really the key to his style of writing, is that it's part of this, it all feeds the drama, it all feeds the approach to the story.
Yeah, and another thing that really helps create this sort of sense of theater in these pieces is they're through composed. So by that I mean that even in Verdi, there's stops after numbers, right? And they're very sort of structured units that are tied together. Whereas here, I mean, you start and you go.
This is part of the verismo you talked about, right? That in our world, we don't stop and wait. I stop and wait for applause, but we don't stop and wait for applause, right? That there's a natural flow, one moment to the next. Like, again, organicism, like this moment, the next moment didn't exist until this moment happened. And however this moment will happen is how the next moment will happen. And the music feels like that.
Yeah, beautifully said. Yoko, I wonder if you could talk a little bit about, so Puccini decides he has to write this opera, right? I mean, he had to. But then there was a lot of work for him to do, to figure out what to do. So I wonder if you can give us a little idea of the research that he did. He worked very, very hard to really get this right. What did he do?
He had he became friend with a lady, actually the wife of the diplomat, Japanese diplomat, and live in Rome. And her name is Hisako, and he got lots of information from her, and he asks how the Japanese women talk and what is actually the pitch. And okay, I don't have a very high pitch, but if you watch something in the Japanese, you do hear something more like a Japanese women always talking a little bit higher pitch. And then also how they move and things like that. But plus the culture of it, and also the Japanese music. The Puccini included 6 or 7 actual Japanese music, included the Japanese national anthem, and she got all the music score for Puccini from Japan. She ordered, and so she really tried to help him. But I was talking backstage that she kind of pointed out something doesn't work as a Japanese person, like, okay, this is not really how we do it or what it's like. But then Puccini still, no, I want to do this way. So I want to keep this way, a butterfly has to be this way. He has idea. So he got the input, but then he obviously put his name on it.
Of course, yeah. So here we see a composer trying to blend, or to take a lot of research. I mean, you can definitely say he did his due diligence here.
Yes.
And studying music, I mean, obsessively asking questions about their music and the culture and everything, but then saying, okay, I have to make this my own voice, or this doesn't work for the theater. And so adapting that.
Yes. He also had some information. He met this lady called Sadayako. She was actress, Japanese actress. She was in one of the Japanese theater troupe, and they were touring in Europe. And the Sadayako was supposed to be before she turned into actress. She was supposed to be geisha, and so she was super popular, especially in I think in Paris and Italy too. And her troupe was in Paris and the Great Exhibition, and also that she came to Rome, and somehow he couldn't go to see her play, but then he had a chance to talk to her later. Then he again asked how the geisha moves and all this, how they wear kimono, and when you wear kimono, how you move, and all little things he had from her.
Yeah, very interesting. And this is we're going to kind of come back to this later, but this idea of how we set these things and why. But I think let's hear a little music. This crowd likes music, believe it or not. So we're going to hear one of the hit tunes, maybe the hit tune from Madame Butterfly. This is Un bel dì, which is the aria that you hear towards the beginning of Act 2. So they've consummated their marriage. Act 1 ends with this gigantic, sprawling love duet. And we come back and time has passed, and much time has passed. And this aria, she's looking out. Suzuki, her friend and her helper, is dubious that Pinkerton will ever appear again. And she soundly rejects this idea, and she sings this really beautiful aria, looking out and talking about the beautiful day when Pinkerton will return, and describing really in vivid detail about the moment that he's going to appear on the horizon and call out to her. So please welcome pianist James Maverick and Yulia Lysenko.
Alla fine
you hold it together over there, Charles? He heard her rehearsing earlier and had an immediate reaction.
Yeah, it's one of those, it just tickles it in tears, like immediate. The moment where she, the big climax, where the return of the theme. You'll start crying. Yeah. But motive, like the idea of I can't wait, I love him so much. When I see him, I will die. I'm afraid I will die, kind of thing, right? This kind of overcome. And from a compositional point of view, you'll hear it more with an orchestra, but James did a great job. There's not a bass there. It's just it's so top heavy, and then the orchestra's on top instead of the big bass drop or something. And you see, musically, how wobbly this image of the future she has is. That's top heavy, right? And it's very subtle, and it gets me every time.
That's a really interesting observation. I mean, how you're describing this kind of little bit of instability in the music. And you also notice that in that aria, it's not a terribly long aria, there are many, many shifts of mood and thought, right, that just sort of turn on a dime. And so we really start to see the complexity of this character, which is one of the really interesting things that we see throughout the opera. And that's something I want to get to next, is now that you've heard a Puccini soprano, just to set this firmly in your mind, I want to talk about Puccini heroines, sopranos, etc. And there are some very interesting things that we hear. For example, oftentimes we hear these characters for the first time off stage, which is true in this one also. The entrance scene at the very beginning after this short prelude, in the little business by Goro and Pinkerton, then we have the entrance of the geishas, and that's where all of the wedding party is coming in, friends, family, and the first time we hear Cio-Cio-San, she's not seen. This is also Tosca. Remember in Bohème, when you hear Mimi, she's outside the door. Yeah. So I don't know. Can you talk a little bit, because you brought this up actually in an email, and I was like, okay, we need to get to that.
It's something that I love that he does. I mean, it works on so many levels. Obviously, it builds tension for us dramatically because we know this character. We want, and these are, Manon too, right? Manon Lescaut as well, right? So these are the characters we showed up for, and he's teasing them for us, right? They're right outside the door or right outside the church, screaming Mario, right? And these moments are dramatic, right? And they make sense. They're also good marketing because these are the these are sopranos, these are the famous, the prima donna, yeah. So these are the people who are the highest paid, and they're already famous. They're the big draw, so you tease the audience on that level too. But there's also this sense of all of these examples you mentioned turn on this female character, right? And how the female character is. In many cases manipulated, sometimes manipulating, or think they're manipulating, and they're actually being manipulated by the drama that's happening around them. And that is a dramatic device. I will just also mention the way this is subverted in Turandot, right? Where Turandot, you see her first and don't hear her, which is another what? So that's a later season.
yeah, exactly. We'll get to that one soon. This is very interesting, and because we know that Puccini, the way he treated these heroines, there's a lot of talk, and we don't have to sort of go down this road, but about his relationship with women, and he had a very, very close relationship with his mother. And so he really uses this to heighten the drama in a lot of interesting ways. So I wanted to get into a little bit of who Cio-Cio-San is, because this is intensely interesting, and to me, it's interesting in this piece that Cio-Cio-San is the one who makes the journey. Everyone else is the same at the end. Pinkerton feels terrible. He's got Catholic guilt, right, because he did something really awful. But, what we see throughout the opera is this maybe transformation even, or just this journey of Cio-Cio-San from how we meet her in the first scene to then Yulia and I, last night, we were working on Act 2, the duet with Sharpless, and she's starting to show this power that we just had no idea in the first act. So I wonder if you could talk a little bit about who this character is. What is she based on? What do we know about this and maybe her world at this time?
Right. So she is 15 years old when opera started when she got married at 15, and she said that she is from a prominent samurai family. And actually, interesting is Nagasaki is the southern part of Japan, and what is in we are islands, and Nagasaki is in Kyushu. Kyushu, it has a huge history of this samurai mind, and even now, if you meet the Japanese guy I'm from Kyushu, and the men are super dominant, and so she's from there. So she is really in the samurai family daughter, and something happened to her family, so she doesn't have any money anymore, and her father committed suicide, and so that's why she became geisha. And so she is, she obviously have a class, and she's 15, but she has a class, and she has some kind of education, not necessarily in school, but she was taught in a certain way. But then she was kind of naive. She fell in love, and she thought it's a real marriage, and she was so happy, and she was chatting with her friends, and so she decided to, be a really faithful, devoted wife forever. And she actually thought she would become American, and so that's how naive she was. But then when the time passed by, and she became mother, and she started. I'm not quite sure if she had some doubt, and that area she had some doubt, but she wanted to erase that. That was the area, but so she became strong, and she obviously wanted to. She became someone else, more in a way. She was caught in that house of that in East Hill of Nagasaki, but she had some mentally. I think she kind of freed herself and became like a more really evolved adult woman. And but she is, I think also and always the bottom line, she is the daughter of a samurai, and the samurai, the honor is everything.
Yeah, and that's a big theme that we see in this piece, and we even get a little glimpse into why her father ended his life, right? It was a demand, an implicit demand. And so, but I love what you say about honor, because that's something she talks about a lot, right? These cultural pillars for her of, honor, dignity, emotional fortitude and strength, right? But at this time, this was happening in places like Nagasaki, right? The Nagasaki had become a very, very important thing for America geopolitically, and so this activity did happen, as I understand it.
Yes. Obviously, there is no proper record. Okay, this has happened, but the Nagasaki port of Nagasaki was a very, very important port. One of the important ports. We had 3 ports in Japan. And because proximity to China, all these countries wanted to send a ship to Nagasaki, and then the Russians, the French, and the American, obviously. And there was a rumor that if you go to, I think among the people on the ship, that when we go to Japan, we can have a Japanese wife, and something like that. And then actually historically that in Japan before that was, because we were cross country many years, and the time the butterfly happened, the power shifted from shogun to the imperial Japan. So then we were kind of forced to open the country, and then also then so many things changed. Like before, obviously international marriage was not allowed, but they did. But then everything was in a rush, because really I think Japanese government was forced to change. So on the paper things were changed, but it was many things wasn't being taken care of. And the butterfly was actually one of the, she was in the time of more we had a freedom, but not really maybe because she had a mentality of like that in this shogun period in maybe, but then the world is changing, but still not many things change because always that's what happened. I think everywhere same when things are changing, it just mix of everything.
Yeah, and there is a lot changing in the world at this point, right? I mean, so things are shifting dramatically around her all the time and around, what's happening here in a lot of ways. I wanted to just talk a little bit about modern interpretations here, right? And that we see and kind of different approaches to productions. For this production, we do have some advisors with us who are in the rehearsal room, helping us understand in detail some of these cultural details. And this is something that's interesting, though, because Puccini, like we said, he did his homework and learned as much as he could. Obviously, now that we're a connected global society, we know much, much, much more. But I wanted to talk about how he was contextualizing this, and in the 19th century Europe, this sort of exoticism, kind of this fascination, right? Don't forget that Puccini also wrote an opera about the American West called The Girl of the Golden West, and the main tenor character's name is Dick Johnson. Okay, so we talked about for Pearl Fishers, when we did Pearl Fishers, that originally Bizet had set it in Mexico, and then he thought he might have trouble with that, so then he's like, I don't know, let's do something like Sri Lanka, So they're looking, but what they're doing is they're trying to serve an audience here, right? That's sort of fascinated with this world that is growing and changing, but that they don't have much access to. So I wonder if you could just talk a little bit about what's happening, and both of you will have good insights on this, of culturally what's changing here, and what is Puccini trying to do in writing these pieces?
Yeah, I mean, I think one of the key parts when we talk about these operas that are obviously, like we did with Pearl Fishers, that involve sort of exoticist tropes and maybe Orientalist tropes a little bit. And this is, and as I tell my students, an explanation, not an apology, right? So an explanation is, this was the view of Asia from Europe, right? So this is not Asia, right? This is not, and I think that's important, for those of us when we walk into the hall, that we're not getting a finger quotes authentic experience. We're getting a window to another culture from. I mean, I love how you highlighted, like, it's an English play in London with an Italian, so we're already, there's a lot of stuff in the mix before we even get to the stage. But that idea of what's happening, it's about clash of cultures at a time in which, and there's really at least 3 cultures and maybe even 4 involved. One would be obviously what we might think of as the old Japanese way versus the new Japanese way that you highlighted. So there's shifting sands already in Japan, clash between old and new traditions. But then there's also, the European tradition, which we're seeing, they're interpreting what this is happening for them. But then also there's Europe interpreting a young United States, right? And Europe, and he's writing like, hey, what are these guys getting up to over here? These, as he calls them, a Yankee vagabond, right? That's how he describes him, this first sort of big line. And, there's all this stuff happening. The world is changing so quickly, right? And this is an opera about that change. I think it's important for us to remember that. So, we were talking about these the production history of Turandot is very, very long. We worked with Andrea and her team to put together, we both did, to put together a lobby display. And so you'll see some about older productions, and man, that was a lot of work because there are a lot of them because it's been performed pretty consistently from that month after, till today. But a lot of the issues with these productions, whether they be historic or modern, is sort of what do we do in terms of like traditional or modern kind of interpretations, right? And I think one of the things we can fail at doing very well is doing it authentically correctly, because that's not something they were concerned about in the original, right? They had their image of what they wanted, as you said. Yes, I know that's how they do it in Japan, but on my stage they do it this way, So there's already a conversation happening there.
Yeah, and it's interesting because we do know more, we can, of course, pursue it in being more authentic. But Yoko, I'm curious from your perspective,
Yes.
like how, because there's even a debate that still happens today about who should sing this role. this title role. Does it, need to be an Asian? When I was on the conducting staff at New York City Opera, when I was starting out, they did not put, it had to be an Asian woman singing the role in the repertory production. So at least under that leadership. But this is a continuing conversation. But so to you, I'm curious how you feel about that, and then how important is it that we get these historical and cultural details right on versus, well, not that it has to be in opposition to anything, but is that important to you?
No, the obviously the voice is the most important, and so that's I think that's everybody agree the voice is important, and whoever that looks, and we know we can't have Japanese 15 years old sing at the house. That's not gonna happen unless you're doing a TV drama or Butterfly. So no, but also it's just but I think most of the soprano I spoke to who sing Butterfly, they do have some respect to this 15 years old girl. I think that's important, and they trying to see from her point of view that 15 years old Butterfly Japanese girl. And but see the all this detail on the stage, how you wear kimono and the obi, that the big bell have to be not low or high or whatever. But that really, if you are purist and if you are the kimono teacher, maybe but the fact is, I'm not wearing kimono, and kimono is not the everyday thing, unfortunately now, so not many people know how to wear it, but that's not important. The story is something, is not like those details. And also the fact is, in the Meiji period, when the Butterfly was supposed to be in it, that time, so that all this we got influence from the all different country. And before that, we weren't, actually, I did look it up. In Japan, before 1850, we weren't even allowed to have a beef. And after that, we were like the emperor ate it, and so we encouraged, you have to eat the beef. And something like that. Also the kimono, so because the government was encouraging to be westernized, so the people, especially the upper class people, start wearing the Western clothes. But then they go home, they are more comfortable to wear kimono, which is kind of, to me, I don't think anything comfortable about kimono. But so even the Meiji period, everything is mixed. So people wore that something what someone brought from abroad, wear maybe boots with a kimono. Something, it's really interesting things. So to try to make it really super purist on the stage, almost try to make the Butterfly from, let's say, really Shogun period, 1600, that's not the right either. And it's not important. And personally, no, for me.
Yeah, that's interesting. I mean, I love hearing that perspective. I will say it's been interesting to me to have some of these experts in the room, because the last time I conducted Butterfly, which I think was 2 years ago, I learned that the way that she ends her life at the end had been wrong in every production I had done. That the way she was using the knife was the way that a samurai warrior would use it, but never a woman like her. So we find out these interesting things and try and find this balance of having something that's authentic, but really honoring the lens that the creators had when they wrote the piece. Let's hear another aria, shall we? So this comes late in the opera, we're minutes from the end. And this is, Madame Butterfly in a moment of unbearable resignation. He's not coming back. Going back to what Yoko was talking about with honor being such an important thing, is that she decides to end her life. And she's preparing to do that. And this is Puccini at his as a master is he just keeps turning up the dial, like turning the screw, just dramatically and musically. And there's this intensity that's just, I get goosebumps thinking about it, that happens in the piece. And she's about ready to do the act. And Dolore, we didn't cover, there's a child involved, which I think probably most of you know, called Dolore, which is, says sorrow or sadness, Oftentimes for English productions, it's translated more to trouble, which is a different connotation, actually. I think sorrow is much more accurate. But he enters the room, right, as she's preparing to do it. And sorry, I just had a flash, as a father, she bids farewell to him, reassures him, while at the same time she is deeply grappling with her own decision. But she believes it's the only way to preserve his future and her honor. And that's why she's going to do it. And so I think Puccini does an amazing job of setting this. So please welcome back Yulia and James. Speaking of honor, that's what she says first there. She says, loosely paraphrasing, to die with honor is required of those who live with honor. This idea of honor that's so important to her. So why do we keep coming back to this opera? I mentioned this at the beginning, and I want to kind of close in with this before we take some questions. But what is it?
I think at the end of the day, it's a story of a real person. Again, the verismo aspect, but at a basic level, it's a story of a real person who is dealing with very real problems and very real. Again, it's a kind of extraordinary circumstance, perhaps, but maybe not that extraordinary, right? This sort of love, loss. Of course, the child in the middle is a nice little, again, like turning of the screw, right? But so when we look at this, we can see maybe ourselves, like the kind of mistakes we've made in life and the sort of the what ifs and the why did I do this and not that. And it's a little bit like the blues, if I can, where by watching this struggle and watching this thing happen that makes me cry every time, if you sit next to me, you're going to see it. Sorry, I apologize. That it's something it almost like it's like an exorcism, right? It's like, oh, okay, now I can get that out of me a little bit, that feeling. And it's just so effective, I think. It is something that is so very relatable in terms of this, the naivete, as you say, the way she starts and the way she finishes. She's not the same butterfly. Like there's like a insert cocoon image here, right? I don't know. But yeah, there's something about the sort of growth that is hopeful for us in a weird way, right?
Yeah, totally. Yoko?
Well, I didn't like this opera to start with originally because just horrible. Being Japanese and actually I'm married to American. So, and look at my kids. And this is interesting because maybe one of the most well-known opera in Japan, but maybe most hated, especially among the Japanese women. And I think the story is kind of universal in a way, but the love and she waits. It's interesting. She waits. She sees his ship, but she doesn't go to the port because she has honor and she has dignity. So she doesn't go to see him. She just waits. And to me, it's a universal love, but still something about, for me, it's something traditional there, the butterfly, and I see in me some of them, and also obviously the power of the music. It just overcome everything, and the Puccini is. I don't know. It's just you are almost in tears, but it is. It just makes me feel just like the heart always kind of like, and I don't know. It's just the story is yes. I don't like the story. That I don't like the Pinkerton, but I love the music, and I do see the butterfly. And I think it's every one of us.
Well, thank you both for your insights. We have a moment for a couple of questions, if we've got any questions in the audience. Yes?
Why do Japanese women hate this opera so much?
I'm just going to repeat the question so on the video they can hear. Why do Japanese women hate the opera so much?
Well, because how Pinkerton treated the Japanese women. And he said in the beginning, 999 years of lease, and he can terminate this rent of the lease of the house, and he can terminate marriage. And I don't like that. If my daughter found someone like him, obviously I'm gonna get very upset. That yes. So just don't feel, more you know what he's thinking about, we get annoyed. Naturally, that's the kind of thing.
Well, we know that Puccini did an excellent job building the character of Pinkerton because he's typically booed at the curtain call. I mean, of course, slightly in jest, right? Yeah, good. Another question? Yes, in the back over here. I'll come here next.
Do we know what changes Puccini made after that fiasco of an opening to its successful run a month later?
Yeah, so the question is, do we know what changes he made in the score, in the revision, before it was re-premiered?
We do, because he's very famous. We have a lot of these, and these scores do float around. We were talking about bringing, one of the alternate versions too. But so a lot of the stuff had to do with structural things. There were very subtle changes to like notes and rhythms and whatever. It was more like giving us a little bit more of the male characters, right, to sort of play off of her. There was some trimming that took place, and again, there were other revisions that before we arrived at the sort of standard edition as we will use, right? So there's a lot of sort of subtle things that happen like this.
Yeah, and it's very interesting. Also, there's some pretty significant melodic changes. Right, some of the music that we da-dee-ya-da-da-dum, right, that theme that we first hear in the entrance of the geishas. I mean, in some of the other versions, it's nearly inverted. I mean, it would definitely catch your ear.
One of the things that happened at the premiere is that moment when it came down. There's a startling resemblance in that version to Bohème, which again, he's a theater guy, so he's probably like, remember my other hit, that, and so it's good marketing. And so much so that some of the detractors started chanting Bohème, Bohème, Bohème when they heard these. So there was moments where he sort of did these sort of like these moments to tighten up, and inversion is very smart because it's like there but it ain't there, so it's like one for you and they don't know what to do. But these kind of practices, but these were all things. They weren't sort of like composition by committee, like, oh, they didn't like this, let me change it. It was more like the issue is the drama, the story should tell. And I was saying this is a little bit like we talked about Sondheim, either last season or 10 years ago. I can't tell the difference right now. But we talked about Sondheim, and a lot of it's like, is it serving the story? Is it serving the character, right? And so a lot of these weren't the kinds of changes that were just like to feed the crowd. They were changes that he saw this image, this vision. It didn't go off the way he wanted to. How can he make that happen?
Yeah, and it's very interesting. I think this is one of the things that makes Puccini difficult. Like, I think Act 1 of Bohème is one of the hardest things to conduct in the repertoire because it's so compact, right? And Butterfly similar, he doesn't waste notes, he doesn't waste time. There's always this inexorable movement dramatically. I think there was one other hand. Stephanie, yeah.
So I'm gonna look at my notes really quick. So I'm Asian American, and this opera would mean so much to me. It means so much to me. I know there are 5 revisions. I don't know which one will be performed. Is this the one where Pinkerton returns with his American wife, and then they try to adopt the 15-year-old Japanese girl's baby, and then does she decide to blindfold her son, to prepare him to give him away, and she hides behind a curtain so her son doesn't see her killers?
So there's a couple questions in there. Number one is the version we're doing, where the one where Pinkerton returns. Yes, but we see his his wife, also his American wife that is with him, Kate, and yes, and the idea is that he wants to take the child back with him.
I guess I just wanted to ask. I mean, it's so tragic and heartbreaking, this opera, and I wanted you guys to talk a little bit about the evolution of female empowerment in this opera. I know she and just the fact that an American wife can come and take away her son is abominable. I can't imagine what kind of pain she could be in. And so I just wanted to sort of get your ideas on something like that.
Yeah, so I think this question centers around the injustice, right, of that. I mean, that Pinkerton would believe he could do that, right, and probably could, in the end. I mean, that's a hard thing to grasp for us.
Let's be clear that the child is a metaphor for the West exploitation of Asia, right? That the West can come here and take what it wants, and so he comes back and does that. And I think it's critical to the version that we see that, because in other versions and in the original that we talked about, we were told that he comes back and gets the child, or the child goes away, right? But we see this, and I think the reason, and again, Puccini as a dramatist, but also with the message of the work, this is why I think the casting of Kate is critical. Because this character, which doesn't have a lot to do, right? But how that actress, how that person starts to sort of conceives of that woman's role in this, right, is so powerful to how we experience the end of it. And we won't spoil it. We're going to see it together. But so there is this sort of conversation. There's a duality between this woman who's giving up everything and this woman who's taking that on. And what is that relationship? To me, is I'm just waiting to see how those moments unfold, right? Because I think that is a very important point. Did you have to?
So I think that the child part that is really heartbreaking part. But honestly, that time in Japan and to have a child, have the fatherless, and even that marriage was, permitted, but then still most of people don't see as a real marriage. And so the when maybe Butterfly saw about the happiness to her child, maybe might be better in this country. But then again, I think we talked about, was it really happy for him to be here? And actually there is a story that Nagasaki has lots of these Western houses from that time, and from like Scottish came, and Dutch came, and American came, and British came, and they did marry Japanese women, and they were successful marriage. And there was this actually Lang's sister, John Lang's sister, say that it was based on some story of the Japanese lady who had a daughter or son. And but if that was that was a real Butterfly, her son was adopted into this another interracial family, and he studied in the U.S. But when he came back, he married to another half Japanese, half non-Japanese girl. But then the World War started. Then after the war, he committed suicide. He just couldn't bear. He is actually half Japanese and half American. So I don't know, in the many different ways, it's really that the story is how it ends. It's just really hard, and but that moment, let the child goes, is maybe she thought that was the best way, because she wanted to be American. She said that in this house, this is American.
Yeah, she's very clear about wanting to Americanize through the piece and those changes. I'd like to thank both Yoko and Charles very much for being here and being so generous with us. And I want to thank you for being here tonight. We're very excited about this production. And one of the things that I love most about opera is it levels the playing field, right? Because we can all come from different walks of life and different persuasions and different beliefs. But here inside the theater, we're having a communal experience, and we're able to see humanity on display at its best and worst, right? So thank you so much. We will see you at Madame Butterfly.